Welcome to the Nerds of Comedy. I am your host, Sean Devereaux, coming to you from the Push Comedy Theater, Suffolk, aka the room over my garage. Today we are bringing you another episode of the Lunchtime Nerd. My cat is rubbing up against the microphone. Stop that. Okay. The Lunchtime Nerd is where members of the Push Comedy Theater community talk to you about what they are currently nerding out on. Today, we have Hilary Stallings. She is a co-host here on the Nerds of Comedy, so let's find out what Hilary is a nerd of. And the cat is putting its butt in my face.
What up, nerds? This is the Nerds of Comedy Lunchtime Nerd with your co-host Hilary Stallings, a superior co-host to Bradford McMurrin, I might add. Feel free to continue to send me messages or comment on this video about how much you like my co-hosting compared to Brad McMurrin. Number one, it makes me feel really good, and number two, it makes Brad really mad, and that's really funny. So today on the Lunchtime Nerd, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something that I nerd out about like crazy, and that is podcasts. I love podcasts. The very first podcast that I ever listened to was Serial back when it came out. I want to say 2013-ish. Got super into Serial. From there, I was really into true crime podcasts. Undisclosed, which was about Adnan Syed's case, was the second podcast that I started listening to. And then I kind of went down this rabbit hole of just every true crime podcast that ever existed. And that kind of led to a bunch of other podcasts, basically. So today I'm going to tell you about my top 5 podcasts currently. So I've listened to probably 100 different podcasts. So I'm just going to go through my top 5 that I currently love to listen to. My very favorite right now is probably the Ologies podcast. The host of that is Allie Ward. It is Allie Ward, she basically interviews a bunch of different scientists. And she's really funny. She makes it really easy to learn about all of the different subjects that she interviews people about. She makes things that you would never find interesting super, super interesting. I'm not really into bugs, but there was a really good bugology episode. I think entomology is the proper term for that. One of my favorite episodes was episode 32 with J. Casey Clapp. It was on dendrology or trees. J. Casey Clapp was just super passionate about different trees, and I found it really, really interesting. I like to garden a bit myself, but I didn't know much about trees, so I really enjoyed listening to that one. One of my other favorite podcasts is the Rich Roll podcast. Rich Roll is the actual host of the podcast. He is a vegan ultra marathon runner, which is shockingly rather difficult to be. There's a kind of stigma about veganism that it's difficult for you to be athletic because of the lack of protein, but Rich Roll kind of smashed that stigma. He's super, super fit, and he talks to a lot of really, really interesting guests. It's a long form interview style podcast where he just kind of has a casual conversation with a bunch of different people. One of my favorites was one that he did. I didn't write down the episode number for this one, but an interview that he did with Courtney DeWalter, who's another ultramarathoner. Though it's not always ultramarathoners that he talks to. And she won the 2019 Badwater Marathon. and she beat her next competitor by like 10 hours, and the Badwater Marathon is like a 250-mile race or something crazy like that, and she just had a super inspiring story, and was just a really interesting guest to listen to. One of my other favorite episodes with Rich Roll was episode 317 with Gretchen Rubin. Gretchen Rubin is a famous author. She wrote The Happiness Project, and she's written a couple of other books, one on habits. I'm big into habits. Really enjoy reading books about habits, and Gretchen Rubin just has such a positive attitude, and she's just a really great she's a great author. All of her books are amazing, and listening to her interview on Rich Roll was really inspiring. One of my other favorites is a podcast called Sinister Hood. I had to throw a true crime podcast in here because I do still love them, though I probably don't listen to them quite as much as I used to. Sinister Hood has 2 hosts. Their names are slipping my mind right now, unfortunately, but they are both comedians in the Dallas comedy scene. 2 girl hosts. They are not sisters, though the title of the podcast kind of makes it sound like they might be, but it is true crime. They definitely go into a lot of true crime. Each episode is about a different crime, but they also go into other kind of sinister happenings throughout the world. So they've done an episode on the Kennedy curse. They've done an episode on Dear David, which was this weird Twitter thing that happened where this guy had like a little ghost boy in his apartment. And then one of my favorite episodes of that was episode 36 about Amanda Knox. Amanda Knox is the woman in Italy, the American woman in Italy who was falsely accused of murdering her roommate. And there's been multiple documentaries about it, but it's a really interesting story, and Sinister Hood does a good job of telling the story, but in a kind of lighthearted way. A couple of true crime podcasts that I listen to that kind of like weave comedy with true crime, which is kind of hard to believe, but I really like that kind of style of comedy. Makes some really serious stories seem not so serious all the time, but you still get a really interesting story. Another one of my favorite podcasts is How I Built This. It is hosted by Guy Raz. He basically interviews people who have started really famous companies. He's interviewed the woman that started Spanx is one that I'm thinking of off the top of my head. Richard Branson, who started Virgin Records and then Airlines. He has a really interesting story. That's a really good episode. One of my favorite episodes is one of the early episodes. It's the interview with Joe Gebbia from Airbnb. I kind of have a little bit of a crush on Joe Gebbia after listening to this, and I went on a rampage of finding all the interviews possible with him on there, but it's a really good interview. The whole show, Guy Raz is it's very produced, but he's an incredible interviewer, and you really get to hear the story of how these founders founded these companies, and just hear what a different story of success every episode. So it's definitely different than some of the others that I listed, but I really enjoy that one. Definitely a little more produced than the other ones. And then my last favorite podcast right now is a locally produced podcast. It's produced by Earprov, Go On Productions, Matt Cole, and it is How Embarrassing with Molly Graham and Jeff Ballou.
How embarrassing.
How embarrassing.
How embarrassing.
They are 2 hilarious comedians from the Norfolk comedy scene. They're just, they've got very different personalities. Molly is kind of wild and crazy, and Jeff is like the stoic, kind of deadpan one, but they interview a different guest every episode, and usually it's somebody from the Norfolk comedy scene. And that guest tells their most embarrassing story, and then they have some little games and segments, and it's just really fun, and it's laugh out loud funny. It's always so funny. The hosts are hilarious, and then the producer Matt Cole, he pops in every now and then too with something funny to say. One of my favorite episodes of that is one that recently was released. It's with Angel Sanchez, and it's episode 29, Porcelain. I just listened to this one the other day, and I was on a run, and I was dying laughing while I was on this run, and I passed someone on the street, and they looked at me weird, but it's all good because Angel was hilarious. He has such a great personality, and he was such a wonderful guest. So yeah, that is basically what I nerd out about. Love podcasts. Could probably tell you 20 more and just keep talking about them. I love them so much. So yeah, if you have never checked out a podcast, please do. Please check out one of my top 5 or really any podcast whatsoever. They're great. It's a really, really good way to pass the time. I like to listen to them while I clean and basically while I do everything. So yeah, this has been Hilary Stallings for the Lunchtime Nerd. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.